What if Rome never fell? What if the empire that shaped the ancient world survived its darkest hour and continued into the modern age? How different would our world be today? This is the story of an impossible civilization, a story of a Rome that never died. The year is 476 CE. Across Europe, the Roman Empire is dying. For centuries, Rome had ruled the known world. Its armies marched from Britain to Egypt. Its roads connected continents. Its laws governed millions. To many, Rome seemed eternal, but empires rarely collapse in a single moment. The fall of Rome was not one disaster. It was centuries of problems slowly piling upon one another. Political instability weakened the government. Civil wars drained resources. Economic troubles burdened farmers and merchants. Corruption spread through the administration. The vast machine that once held the empire together was beginning to fail. Beyond the frontiers, new powers waited. Along the Rhine and Danube rivers lived Germanic tribes who had traded with Rome for generations. Some served as soldiers in Roman armies. Others settled within imperial borders. But as pressure from migrating peoples increased, entire tribes began moving toward Roman territory. The empire struggled to respond. In 410 CE, the Visigoths shocked the world by sacking the city of Rome itself. For 800 years, the Eternal City had stood unconquered by foreign armies. Its fall shattered the illusion of Roman invincibility. The empire survived, but confidence did not. As decades passed, more provinces slipped from imperial control. Britain was abandoned. Parts of Gaul were lost. North Africa, one of Rome's richest regions, fell to the Vandals. Grain shipments that once fed cities across the Mediterranean disappeared. Tax revenues collapsed. The Western Empire became weaker with every passing year. Yet Rome was not completely alone. Far to the east stood Constantinople, capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Wealthier, more stable, and better defended than its Western counterpart, it remained one of the greatest cities on earth. Its walls were strong. Its treasury was full. Its armies were disciplined. Many believed the East would survive even if the West vanished. In our timeline, that is exactly what happened. The Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 CE when the Germanic commander Odoacer deposed the young Emperor Romulus Audustulus. The imperial insignia were sent to Constantinople. The Western Empire ceased to exist. Europe entered a new age. But history is often shaped by moments that almost happened. There were opportunities to save Rome, victories that nearly succeeded, reforms that almost worked, leaders who came close to reversing the decline. In another timeline, one of those opportunities succeeds. Our story begins 8 years earlier, in 468 CE. The Roman world launches a massive campaign against the Vandals of North Africa. Historically, the expedition ended in disaster. One of the largest fleets ever assembled by Rome was destroyed. Thousands of soldiers were lost. The treasury was emptied. The failure pushed the Western Empire closer to collapse. But in this world, events unfold differently. Roman commanders avoid critical mistakes. The fleet remains intact. The Vandal defenses are overwhelmed. Carthage falls back into Roman hands. For the first time in decades, Rome achieves a major victory. The consequences are immediate. North Africa was not just another province. It was one of the empire's most valuable regions. Its grain-fed cities, its ports connected trade routes, its taxes funded armies. With Carthage restored, wealth begins flowing back into imperial coffers. Confidence returns. Merchants invest again. Trade expands across the Mediterranean. More importantly, the victory changes something that cannot be measured in gold. It changes belief. People begin to think the empire can survive. The Eastern Emperor sees an opportunity. Instead of treating the West as a lost cause, Constantinople commits fully to its recovery. Gold is sent westward. Administrators are dispatched to struggling provinces. Military reforms are expanded. Frontier defenses are strengthened. The Western Empire is no longer abandoned. It becomes a project worth saving. New leaders emerge. Corrupt officials are removed. Tax systems are reorganized. Veteran soldiers are settled along vulnerable frontiers. Local communities are encouraged to participate in regional defense. The empire begins solving problems rather than merely reacting to them. Rome also changes its approach toward the Germanic tribes. Instead of viewing every tribe as an enemy, the government focuses on integration. Tribal leaders receive Roman titles. Their warriors are recruited into imperial service. Their families settle within Roman territory. Their children grow up speaking Latin and serving Rome. The strategy is simple. If Rome cannot stop every migration, it can transform migrants into Romans. It is a policy the empire had used successfully for centuries. Now it returns to its roots. Slowly, stability returns. The Rhine frontier strengthens. Trade routes reopen. Agricultural production increases. Cities begin recovering. Roads are repaired. Markets grow busier. The recovery is not dramatic. It takes years, then decades. But for the first time in generations, Rome is moving forward instead of backward. A new generation comes of age knowing prosperity instead of crisis. They hear stories of invasions and collapse from their grandparents, but their own experience is different. They see construction projects, economic growth, functioning institutions, military victories. To them, Rome does not appear to be a dying empire. It appears to be a recovering one. Across Europe, the effects become impossible to ignore. Provinces that once seemed destined to break away remain loyal. Regional leaders cooperate with imperial authorities. Investors fund new ventures. Scholars return to urban centers. Confidence spreads throughout the empire. Yet challenges remain. Powerful tribes still exist beyond the frontiers. Political rivalries have not disappeared. The recovery remains fragile. One mistake could still undo everything. But something extraordinary has happened. The collapse that seemed inevitable has been avoided. Rome has survived its greatest crisis. The empire stands at the edge of history, looking into a future that was never meant to exist. In our world, Rome died. In this world, Rome endures. And as the 6th century approaches, the nations beyond its borders are about to discover that the Roman Empire is not a memory of the past. It is still alive, and its story is only beginning. The year is 500 CE. In our timeline, the Western Roman Empire had already vanished. The old imperial provinces were divided among competing kingdoms. The once mighty city of Rome had become a shadow of its former self. Across Europe, a new age had begun. But not in this world. Here, the empire still stands. The victory in North Africa had changed everything. Grain once again flowed across the Mediterranean. Tax revenues recovered. Trade routes reopened. More importantly, Rome had regained something it had nearly lost forever: confidence. For decades, people had spoken of decline. Every generation expected the empire to shrink further. Every crisis seemed to confirm that collapse was inevitable. Yet now the story was changing. The empire was no longer preparing for death. It was preparing for survival. Across Italy, roads that had fallen into disrepair were restored. Bridges were rebuilt. Garrisons were reinforced. Merchants traveled safely between cities once more. Markets expanded. Workshops reopened. Economic activity returned to regions that had spent decades struggling against uncertainty. The government understood that military victories alone could not save Rome. The empire needed stability. It needed functioning institutions. It needed people who believed the future was worth investing in. New reforms were introduced throughout the western provinces. Corruption, long tolerated out of necessity, became a target. Provincial governors faced greater oversight. Tax collection became more efficient. Landowners who had once ignored imperial authority found themselves drawn back into the system. The results were gradual but undeniable. Cities began growing again. Milan expanded. Ravenna prospered. Arles became a major center of trade. Even Rome itself showed signs of recovery. Its population remained far below the heights of earlier centuries, but construction projects returned to the city. Temples, churches, public baths, and government buildings received long overdue repairs. For the first time in generations, people spoke about rebuilding rather than surviving. Yet the greatest challenge remained beyond the frontiers. Across northern Europe, powerful Germanic tribes watched Rome's recovery with growing concern. Many had expected the empire to disappear. Some had already begun planning for a post-Roman world. Now those plans were threatened. The Visigoths in Spain, the Franks in Gaul, and various tribes along the Rhine faced a difficult reality. Rome was stronger than anyone had predicted. Some chose confrontation. Others chose cooperation. The Roman government encouraged the latter. Rather than attempting endless wars of conquest, imperial leaders embraced a strategy that had helped build Rome centuries earlier: integration. Tribal leaders willing to cooperate received Roman titles. Their warriors joined the imperial military. Their families settled within Roman territory. Trade agreements linked frontier communities to Roman markets. The process was not always peaceful. Several tribes resisted Roman influence. Border conflicts erupted. Raids continued. But Rome now possessed the resources to respond effectively. Every victory reinforced the same message. The empire was not dying. It was recovering. By the beginning of the 6th century, the Western and Eastern empires had entered a new phase of cooperation. Though governed separately, they increasingly viewed themselves as partners rather than rivals. Constantinople provided financial support, administrative expertise, and military assistance. In return, the West stabilized the frontier regions and protected vital trade networks. Together, they represented something the world had not seen in generations: a united Roman future. The Mediterranean, once threatened by fragmentation, began functioning once again as a single economic system. Ships traveled safely between ports. Goods moved across vast distances. Merchants carried wine, olive oil, textiles, grain, and luxury products throughout the empire. Prosperity spread. With prosperity came growth. Schools reopened in major cities. Libraries expanded their collections. Scholars copied texts that might otherwise have been lost. Engineers repaired infrastructure and developed new techniques for construction and water management. Knowledge survived because civilization survived. In our timeline, much of Western Europe experienced centuries of political fragmentation following Rome's fall. Learning declined in many regions. Trade networks shrank. Urban populations collapsed. In this world, none of that happens. The chain remains unbroken. A child born in Gaul in 520 CE grows up under Roman law. A merchant in Spain conducts business using Roman currency. A soldier on the Rhine serves beneath Roman banners. The institutions that held the ancient world together continue functioning, generation after generation. But survival creates new challenges. As the empire strengthens, ambitious leaders emerge. Some see opportunities for reform. Others see opportunities for power. The old dangers of political rivalry have not disappeared. Several military commanders gain influence through successful frontier campaigns. Popular governors accumulate loyal supporters. Wealthy aristocrats seek greater control over regional affairs. Rome has escaped collapse. Now it must avoid complacency. The emperor understands this danger. A series of reforms restructures military command. Provincial authorities are balanced against imperial oversight. Local elites receive incentives to support central administration rather than undermine it. The goal is simple: prevent the conditions that nearly destroyed the empire from returning. Meanwhile, beyond the frontier, something remarkable begins to happen. Many Germanic communities voluntarily adopt Roman customs. Latin spreads across previously independent territories. Roman architecture appears in frontier settlements. Tribal leaders increasingly identify themselves as Roman citizens rather than foreign rulers. The distinction between Roman and barbarian begins to blur, not through conquest, through assimilation. The process transforms Europe. Instead of competing successor kingdoms, a new generation emerges that views itself as part of a broader Roman civilization. Cultural differences remain, but the political framework endures. The empire grows stronger with each passing decade. Trade expands farther north. New settlements emerge along major routes. Agricultural productivity increases. Population growth accelerates. The future looks brighter than it has in centuries. Yet history rarely rewards optimism for long. Far beyond Rome's borders, new powers are rising. In the east, ambitious kingdoms watch the Roman recovery with interest. Along distant trade routes, merchants bring reports of expanding empires and shifting alliances. New challenges are gathering beyond the horizon. The empire has survived its greatest internal crisis. Now it must face a changing world. For Rome's recovery has altered the course of history. The age of collapse has ended. The age of expansion is about to begin. And beyond the frontier, the last barbarian kingdoms are preparing to make a choice. Join Rome, or challenge it. The decision will shape the next 1,000 years of history. By the middle of the 6th century, Europe looked very different from the world historians remember. In our timeline, the Western Roman Empire had fallen and new kingdoms rose upon its ruins. The Franks ruled Gaul. The Visigoths dominated Spain. The Ostrogoths controlled Italy. Across the continent, the old Roman order gave way to a patchwork of competing states. But in this world, Rome endured. The empire's survival changed the destiny of every kingdom that expected to inherit its lands. The barbarian tribes who once stood ready to divide Europe now faced a different reality. The Roman Empire was not a memory. It was a living power. Along the Rhine frontier, Roman forts stood stronger than they had in generations. Patrols guarded the rivers. Roads connected military outposts to growing cities. Merchants crossed borders under imperial protection. Trade flowed where war once threatened. Many tribal leaders began to understand that cooperation offered greater reward than conflict. Roman citizenship, access to markets, military careers, and political influence became increasingly attractive. For younger generations raised near the frontier, Rome no longer seemed like a foreign civilization. It seemed like the future. The Franks were among the first to adapt. Historically, they would become one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. In this alternate world, their rulers pursued a different path. Rather than replacing Roman authority, they joined it. Frankish nobles entered imperial service. Their warriors enlisted in Roman armies. Their leaders received prestigious titles from the emperor. Over time, Frankish identity merged with Roman identity. The same process unfolded elsewhere. In Spain, Visigothic leaders negotiated greater autonomy while remaining loyal to the empire. Roman law spread throughout their territories. Latin became the language of administration and trade. Cities expanded under imperial protection. The old distinction between conqueror and conquered slowly disappeared. In Italy, the Ostrogoths followed a similar path. Their rulers recognized that preserving Roman institutions brought stability and prosperity. Instead of dismantling the imperial system, they became its guardians. Across Europe, tribal kingdoms transformed into Roman provinces governed by local elites loyal to the empire. This process was not always peaceful. Some leaders rejected Roman influence. Several uprisings erupted along the frontiers. Coalitions of tribes attempted to resist integration. Yet Rome now possessed the strength and resources to respond effectively. Veteran armies moved quickly along restored roads. Fortified cities resisted sieges. Economic pressure often succeeded where military force was unnecessary. One by one, resistance faded. By the year 600 CE, the map of Europe had changed dramatically. Instead of fragmented successor kingdoms, a vast Roman commonwealth stretched across the continent. Regional cultures remained distinct, but they existed within a shared political framework. Laws were enforced through imperial courts. Taxes funded public works. Trade linked distant provinces into a single economic system. The Mediterranean once again became the center of a connected world. The effects were profound. Without constant warfare between rival kingdoms, commerce flourished. Merchants traveled safely from Britain to North Africa. Agricultural production increased. Cities grew larger. Literacy expanded among administrative and commercial classes. Schools received support from local governments eager to train future officials. Knowledge that might have been lost during centuries of instability instead continued to circulate. Engineers improved roads and bridges. Architects refined construction techniques. Scholars preserved texts from Greece and Rome while adding new ideas of their own. The continuity of civilization remained intact. But Rome's greatest victory was psychological. For generations, people had feared collapse. Now they expected stability. Children grew up assuming that Roman institutions would always exist. The empire was no longer surviving. It was thriving. Yet success created new ambitions. Wealth generated competition. Provincial governors sought greater influence. Powerful families accumulated land and resources. Military commanders gained prestige through frontier campaigns. The empire had defeated external threats, but internal challenges remained. Rome's leaders understood that prosperity alone could not guarantee unity. They needed a vision larger than survival. A vision capable of binding together millions of people across thousands of miles. The answer came through identity. The empire encouraged a new understanding of what it meant to be Roman. No longer defined by birthplace or ancestry, Roman identity became civic rather than ethnic. A farmer in Gaul, a merchant in Spain, a soldier from Germania, and a scholar in Italy could all claim the same citizenship. The empire became not merely a state, but a civilization. This idea proved remarkably powerful. Communities that once saw themselves as separate peoples increasingly viewed themselves as part of something larger. Shared laws, shared institutions, and shared prosperity created bonds stronger than conquest alone could achieve. By the dawn of the 7th century, the barbarian age was ending. The kingdoms that once threatened Rome had either joined it or disappeared. The frontier between Roman and barbarian no longer marked a line between civilization and wilderness. Instead, it became a zone of transformation where new populations entered the imperial world. History would remember this era as the time when Rome achieved what conquest alone never could. It turned its enemies into citizens. It transformed rivals into partners. It absorbed entire nations without destroying them. The last barbarian kingdoms had not been conquered. They had been integrated. And as Europe entered a new century of peace and growth, the Roman eagle flew higher than it had in generations. The empire that nearly died now stood stronger than ever before. But beyond Europe, a changing world was beginning to emerge. New religions, new trade routes, and new powers were rising across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Rome had secured its continent. The next challenge would be securing its future. The age of survival was over. The age of restoration had begun. By the year 650 CE, Rome was no longer a civilization fighting for survival. It had become a civilization preparing for greatness. The crises that nearly destroyed the empire had faded into memory. Roads were secure. Cities prospered. Trade flowed across continents. The Roman world had entered an era few believed possible only 2 centuries earlier. Recovery had become renewal. Renewal was becoming transformation. Across Europe, the signs were everywhere. Markets expanded beyond their ancient boundaries. New towns emerged along major trade routes. Ports bustled with merchants carrying goods from distant lands. Grain from North Africa, spices from the East, Metals from Germania and textiles from the Mediterranean moved through a network more interconnected than any the world had seen before. The empire was growing richer with each passing decade. Wealth brought opportunity. Opportunity attracted talent. Engineers developed new construction methods. Architects designed larger public buildings. Administrators improved systems of governance. Scholars copied old manuscripts while creating new works of their own. For the first time in centuries, the future seemed larger than the past. Cities became symbols of Rome's rebirth. Rome itself, once threatened by decline, experienced a revival. Public works projects transformed the city. Aqueducts carried fresh water into growing districts. Forums became centers of commerce and administration. Temples, churches, libraries, and academies filled the urban landscape. The city regained much of its prestige as the heart of the empire. Elsewhere, cities flourished as well. Milan expanded into a major economic center. Ravenna became known for its architecture and administration. Arles connected Northern Europe to Mediterranean trade. Across the empire, urban life became stronger than it had been for generations. Education expanded alongside prosperity. Local governments funded schools. Wealthy patrons supported scholars. Literacy spread beyond traditional elites. Young Romans studied law, mathematics, rhetoric, engineering, and philosophy. Knowledge that might have disappeared after Rome's fall remained alive and accessible. The empire was not merely preserving civilization, it was improving it. Innovation became increasingly important. Roman engineers refined water systems, bridges, roads, and ports. Agricultural productivity increased through better irrigation and farming techniques. New tools reduced labor while increasing output. Population growth accelerated as food became more abundant and trade more reliable. Entire regions that once struggled with instability entered periods of sustained development. Yet Rome's greatest achievement was unity. The empire governed a vast territory filled with different cultures, languages, and traditions. Maintaining cohesion across such diversity required more than military strength. It required institutions people trusted. Roman law became one of the empire's strongest foundations. Citizens from Britain to Syria could rely on shared legal principles. Contracts were enforced. Property rights were protected. Disputes were resolved through established courts rather than private violence. Stability encouraged investment, and investment encouraged growth. Trade networks stretched farther than ever before. Caravans crossed deserts carrying silk and precious goods from Asia. Merchant fleets connected Mediterranean ports in a constant flow of commerce. Economic activity linked distant provinces into a single system. A farmer in Gaul could benefit from events occurring thousands of miles away. The empire had become an interconnected organism. Military power evolved as well. The frontier armies remained strong, but Rome increasingly relied on diplomacy, alliances, and economic influence rather than conquest. Neighboring peoples sought access to Roman markets and institutions. Many willingly adopted Roman customs because doing so improved their lives. Expansion became cultural rather than territorial. The evil no longer needed to conquer every land. Its influence spread through attraction. This transformation changed the nature of empire itself. Earlier Roman generations had measured success through territory gained and enemies defeated. Now success was measured through prosperity, stability, and influence. The empire's strength came not only from what it controlled, but from what others wished to join. Yet every golden age creates new questions. As wealth increased, so did expectations. Citizens demanded better infrastructure, better governance, and greater opportunities. Provincial leaders sought more authority. Scholars challenged traditional assumptions. New ideas spread rapidly through growing networks of education and communication. Rome was becoming more sophisticated. It was also becoming more complex. The government responded with reforms designed to modernize administration. Provinces gained greater flexibility while remaining loyal to central authority. Local councils handled regional issues. Imperial officials focused on broader coordination. The balance between unity and autonomy became one of Rome's greatest strengths. It allowed the empire to remain cohesive without becoming rigid. By the end of the 7th century, visitors arriving in Roman territory encountered a civilization unlike any before it. Roads connected cities separated by thousands of miles. Laws provided predictable order. Markets offered goods from every corner of the known world. Schools educated future generations. Public works improved daily life. The empire had achieved something extraordinary. It had survived long enough to reinvent itself. Historians of this alternate world would later describe this era as the true rebirth of Rome. Not because the empire recovered what it once had, but because it became something entirely new. The old Rome conquered through legions. The new Rome led through institutions. The old Rome expanded through war. The new Rome expanded through prosperity. The eagle had been reborn. And as the centuries passed, its shadow would stretch farther than any emperor of the ancient world could have imagined. A new age was approaching. An age of learning, discovery, and innovation. An age that historians in our world would call the Renaissance. But in this timeline, it was arriving centuries earlier. The empire had been saved. Now it was about to change the course of human progress itself. By the year 800 CE, Europe had become something no one in our timeline would recognize. The centuries that followed Rome's survival had transformed the continent. There had been no collapse into isolated kingdoms. No widespread loss of infrastructure. No centuries of fragmentation. The empire remained the foundation upon which Europe continued to grow. What had once been an ancient state was now becoming a continental civilization. For generations, Roman roads had continued to expand. New highways connected distant provinces. Trade moved faster and farther than ever before. Travelers could journey from Britannia to Egypt, from Hispania to Syria, without leaving imperial territory. Every road, bridge, and port strengthened the connections between regions that might otherwise have drifted apart. Geography no longer divided Europe. Rome united it. The economic effects were enormous. Merchants no longer faced dozens of competing kingdoms, currencies, or legal systems. A common framework governed trade across the continent. Goods flowed freely through cities and ports linked by reliable infrastructure. Grain, wine, iron, timber, silk, and spices moved across thousands of miles with remarkable efficiency. Markets expanded beyond local needs and became continental in scale. Wealth accumulated rapidly. Cities experienced unprecedented growth. Rome remained a symbol of imperial authority, but it was no longer the only center of power. Milan, Carthage, Arles, Constantinople, Alexandria, and countless other cities thrived within a network that spanned continents. Urban populations increased steadily. New districts emerged. Public buildings multiplied. The empire was becoming more urbanized with every generation. Education expanded alongside prosperity. Schools existed in nearly every major city. Universities began emerging centuries earlier than they had in our timeline. Students traveled across the empire to study law, philosophy, engineering, medicine, and mathematics. Knowledge moved freely between regions. Scholars debated ideas across vast distances. Libraries grew larger with every passing decade. The continuity of learning created an intellectual environment unlike anything Europe had previously experienced. Without the disruptions that followed Rome's fall in our timeline, ancient knowledge remained accessible. Engineers studied the works of earlier generations and improved upon them. Mathematicians expanded existing theories. Physicians built upon centuries of accumulated medical knowledge. Progress became cumulative rather than cyclical. Each generation inherited the achievements of the last and pushed them further. The empire also became increasingly diverse. Peoples who had once existed beyond Rome's borders now considered themselves part of the Roman world. Franks, Goths, Celts, Iberians, Greeks, Syrians, Egyptians, and countless others participated in a shared civilization. Cultural differences remained, but they existed within a broader Roman identity. Citizenship became the common thread connecting millions of people across vast distances. Language played a crucial role in maintaining unity. Latin remained the language of government, law, and education throughout much of the empire. Local languages survived and evolved, but a shared administrative language allowed communication across regions. Ideas could spread rapidly because scholars, merchants, and officials shared a common intellectual framework. Rome was no longer simply a political entity. It had become a civilization bound together by communication. The military evolved as well. The empire still maintained powerful armies, but warfare became less frequent within Europe itself. Stable frontiers and successful integration reduced the need for constant campaigns. Resources that might once have funded wars were increasingly invested in infrastructure, education, and commerce. Peace became one of Rome's greatest advantages. Generations grew up without experiencing the large-scale conflicts that had once defined European history. This stability encouraged innovation. Inventors experimented with new technologies. Engineers refined machinery used in agriculture and construction. Watermills became more efficient. Metallurgy advanced. Navigation improved. Small improvements accumulated over centuries, creating foundations for future breakthroughs. Rome was entering an age where knowledge itself became a source of power. Yet unity also brought challenges. Governing such a vast and prosperous civilization required increasingly sophisticated institutions. Provincial leaders sought greater influence. Regional economies developed unique interests. Balancing local autonomy with imperial cohesion became one of the government's greatest responsibilities. Fortunately, centuries of administrative experience provided Rome with tools few states could match. The empire adapted rather than resisted change. New systems of representation emerged. Provincial councils gained greater authority over local affairs. Communication between regions improved. The government became more flexible while maintaining overall unity. This ability to evolve allowed Rome to avoid many of the crises that destroyed other empires. By the 9th century, visitors from beyond Roman borders encountered a civilization unlike any on Earth. They saw cities illuminated by prosperity, roads stretching beyond the horizon, universities filled with scholars, and markets overflowing with goods from distant lands. Europe had become the most interconnected region in the world. The dream of a united continent, impossible in our timeline, had become reality. But Rome's ambitions were growing. The empire had mastered its continent. Its merchants sailed farther every year. Its scholars studied distant lands with increasing curiosity. Its leaders looked beyond familiar horizons. The old world was becoming too small for a civilization that had survived when history expected it to die. Beyond the western seas lay mysteries no Roman had yet explored. Beyond known maps waited opportunities that could reshape the future forever. Europe was united. Rome was stronger than ever. And soon, the empire would begin looking beyond the edge of the world itself. By the year 950 CE, Rome had achieved something no civilization in history had ever managed. It had preserved its past without becoming trapped by it. The empire was no longer living on the achievements of its ancestors. It was creating achievements of its own. Across Europe, a new age was beginning. Historians would later call it the Roman Renaissance. In our timeline, the Renaissance would not begin for another 500 years. It would emerge from the rediscovery of ancient knowledge. But in this world, that knowledge had never been lost. The chain of learning remained unbroken. The libraries of Rome, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Carthage continued to grow. Scholars copied ancient texts, studied them, challenged them, and expanded upon them. Knowledge was not being rediscovered. It was advancing. Universities became some of the most important institutions in the empire. Students traveled thousands of miles to study under renowned teachers. Mathematics, engineering, medicine, Astronomy, philosophy, architecture, and law attracted minds from every province. Ideas flowed freely across borders. A discovery made in Alexandria could be discussed in Rome within months. An innovation in Gaul could influence builders in Syria before the year ended. The empire had become an intellectual network unlike anything the ancient world had imagined. Scientific thinking began to evolve rapidly. Roman scholars increasingly relied on observation, experimentation, and measurement. Instead of accepting old conclusions simply because they were ancient, they tested them. Engineers built prototypes. Astronomers recorded precise observations of the heavens. Physicians documented treatments and outcomes. Knowledge became a process rather than a collection of inherited truths. The results were extraordinary. Advances in agriculture increased food production throughout the empire. Improved plows, irrigation systems, and crop rotation techniques allowed farmers to feed growing populations. Surplus food supported larger cities and freed more people to pursue specialized professions. Economic growth accelerated. Urban centers expanded. Prosperity spread across the continent. Architecture entered a golden age. Roman builders combined centuries of accumulated knowledge with new innovations. Massive bridges crossed rivers that had once divided regions. Aqueducts supplied growing cities with fresh water. Public buildings reached levels of scale and complexity unseen since the height of the ancient empire. Visitors from distant lands viewed Roman cities with amazement. They were witnessing a civilization becoming more sophisticated with every generation. Navigation improved dramatically. Shipbuilders experimented with stronger hulls, larger sails, and more efficient designs. Merchant fleets crossed the Mediterranean with increasing speed and reliability. Explorers pushed farther into unfamiliar waters. Cartographers produced increasingly accurate maps. The boundaries of the known world slowly expanded. Meanwhile, advances in communication transformed administration. Courier systems became faster and more organized. Information moved efficiently across vast distances. Governors coordinated with imperial authorities more effectively than ever before. The empire's size no longer slowed decision-making. Rome was becoming not only larger, but smarter. Art and culture flourished alongside science. Writers produced new works inspired by both classical traditions and contemporary experiences. Sculptors refined techniques developed centuries earlier. Architects experimented with forms that blended beauty and functionality. Music evolved as cultural influences mixed throughout the empire. A shared civilization encouraged creativity on a scale rarely seen before. Yet perhaps the most important change was philosophical. Scholars increasingly asked questions about nature itself. What governed the motion of the stars? How did light travel? Why did objects move? How could diseases be treated more effectively? Curiosity became a driving force of society. The pursuit of knowledge gained prestige equal to military success or political power. The empire began producing individuals whose influence stretched far beyond their lifetimes. Mathematicians developed new methods of calculation. Astronomers refined models of the cosmos. Physicians compiled vast collections of medical knowledge. Engineers created machines that improved daily life. Each breakthrough inspired further investigation. Progress accelerated because success generated more curiosity. The Roman government actively encouraged this environment. Emperors funded libraries, schools, observatories, and engineering projects. Public investment in knowledge became a cornerstone of imperial policy. Leaders recognized that innovation strengthened the empire as surely as armies did. An educated population became one of Rome's greatest assets. By the end of the 10th century, the effects of this early Renaissance were visible everywhere. Literacy rates had increased significantly. Scientific knowledge expanded year after year. Trade connected distant regions more effectively than ever before. Living standards improved across much of the empire. Rome was entering an age of discovery centuries ahead of schedule. But curiosity rarely stops at familiar horizons. As maps improved and ships grew more capable, explorers began asking a new question. What lies beyond the Western Ocean? Ancient stories spoke of distant lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Sailors told tales of islands hidden in the Atlantic. Scholars debated whether unknown continents might exist beyond the horizon. Most dismissed such ideas as speculation. A few saw possibility. They would soon be proven right. The Roman Renaissance had transformed how people understood the world. Now it was about to transform the world itself. For beyond the edge of every map lay opportunities that would change human history forever. The empire had mastered knowledge. The next step was exploration. And somewhere beyond the Western Sea, an entire world waited to be discovered. By the year 1050 CE, the Roman Empire stood at the height of its power. Its cities were prosperous. Its roads connected continents. Its scholars pushed the boundaries of knowledge. Its merchants traded across vast distances. For centuries, Rome had looked inward, strengthening the world it already possessed. Now, for the first time, it began looking outward. Beyond the western edge of every map stood the Pillars of Hercules, the narrow gateway between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean. To the ancients, they marked the boundary of the known world. Beyond them stretched an endless sea filled with uncertainty, storms, and legend. Most sailors hugged familiar coastlines. Most merchants preferred predictable routes. But curiosity had become one of Rome's defining traits. And curiosity does not respect boundaries. Roman shipbuilders had spent generations improving their craft. Vessels grew larger, stronger, and more capable of surviving long voyages. New navigation techniques emerged from centuries of astronomical study. Mariners learned to chart their position using the stars with increasing accuracy. Maps improved. Instruments became more precise. The ocean no longer seemed impossible. It seemed unexplored. Explorers began venturing farther into the Atlantic than ever before. At first, they discovered islands. Some were known only through rumor. Others appeared on no map at all. These discoveries fueled public fascination. Scholars debated what might exist beyond the horizon. Merchants imagined new trade opportunities. Emperors saw the possibility of expanding Roman influence without war. The ocean became the empire's newest frontier. Expeditions multiplied. Some returned with strange plants, unfamiliar animals, and stories of lands no Roman had ever seen. Others vanished entirely, swallowed by storms and distance. Yet each voyage pushed knowledge farther west. Every map grew slightly larger. Every expedition made the unknown seem less distant. By the late 11th century, Roman ports along the Atlantic coast became centers of exploration. Shipyards expanded rapidly. Navigation schools trained new generations of sailors. Wealthy merchants financed expeditions in hopes of discovering profitable trade routes. Exploration became both a scientific pursuit and an economic enterprise. Entire communities dedicated themselves to reaching places no human had documented before. Advances in astronomy played a crucial role. Roman scholars developed increasingly accurate methods for calculating latitude. Observatories recorded the movement of stars with remarkable precision. Sailors combined this knowledge with practical experience gained through years at sea. The result was a new confidence in long-distance navigation. The Atlantic no longer represented the edge of the world. It represented opportunity. Yet not everyone supported these ventures. Critics argued that resources should be spent improving the empire rather than chasing distant horizons. Some believed the risks outweighed any potential reward. Others feared that distant expeditions would overextend Roman power. Similar arguments had appeared throughout history whenever civilizations faced new frontiers. The debate revealed something important. Rome had become so stable that it could afford to argue about exploration rather than survival. Ultimately, curiosity prevailed. The empire continued funding voyages. Merchants continued investing. Sailors continued sailing. Each year brought new discoveries. New islands appeared on maps. New currents were documented. New routes connected distant regions of the Atlantic. The ocean slowly transformed from a barrier into a highway. As exploration expanded, so did Rome's understanding of the world. Scholars revised geographic theories inherited from antiquity. Ancient assumptions were questioned. New evidence challenged old beliefs. The empire's intellectual culture encouraged adaptation rather than resistance. Facts mattered more than tradition. This mindset accelerated discovery. Explorers became celebrities throughout the empire. Their journeys captured public imagination. Stories of distant oceans and unknown lands spread through cities and marketplaces. Children grew up hearing tales of adventure beyond the Western Sea. The spirit of exploration entered Roman culture itself. The empire was becoming a civilization of discoverers. By the beginning of the 12th century, evidence suggested something extraordinary. The Atlantic was larger than anyone had imagined, but it was not endless. Reports from distant voyages hinted at land far beyond known islands. Strange birds appeared far from any coast. Ocean currents carried unfamiliar vegetation. Experienced navigators began suspecting that another continent might exist across the sea. The possibility changed everything. Merchants envisioned untapped markets. Scholars dreamed of new knowledge. Emperors considered the political implications of entire civilizations waiting beyond the horizon. If such lands existed, they would represent the greatest discovery in human history. Preparations began for larger expeditions than any Rome had previously attempted. Shipyards worked tirelessly. Astronomers refined navigation techniques. Cartographers prepared new charts. The empire concentrated centuries of accumulated knowledge toward a single goal, reaching whatever lay beyond the Western Ocean. Rome had spent generations mastering its continent. It had rebuilt civilization, accelerated progress, and united Europe under a single system. Now it stood on the threshold of something even greater. The maps were ending. The unknown was beginning. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, beyond the Atlantic, beyond every horizon known to mankind, an entirely new world waited. And soon, the Roman eagle would cross the ocean to find it. By the year 1150 CE, the Roman Empire stood on the edge of the greatest discovery in human history. For more than a century, explorers had pushed deeper into the Atlantic. They mapped islands, charted currents, and followed the stars farther west than any civilization before them. What began as curiosity had become obsession. Somewhere beyond the horizon, many believed another world waited. The expedition that changed history departed from the western coast of Hispania. Its ships were larger than any that had crossed the Atlantic before. Their hulls were reinforced for long voyages. Their crews included sailors, engineers, scholars, physicians, and cartographers. This was not merely an exploration mission. It was a floating institution of Roman knowledge. Weeks passed beneath endless skies. The familiar islands disappeared behind them. Supplies dwindled. Storms tested the fleet. Some sailors questioned whether land existed at all. Others remained convinced that the ocean must eventually end. Then, one morning, a lookout spotted birds. Not seabirds, land birds. Hours later, branches drifted past the ships. Then came the sight that would change the world forever. Land. A coastline stretched across the horizon. Forests reached to the sea. Rivers flowed into the ocean. Mountains rose in the distance. Before them stood a continent unknown to Rome, unknown to Europe, unknown to the civilizations of the Old World. The discovery spread across the empire like wildfire. Merchants celebrated. Scholars debated. Emperors planned. Maps had to be redrawn. History had to be rewritten. The new continent represented possibilities beyond imagination. At first, Roman expeditions remained cautious. Small settlements were established along the coast. Fortified harbors provided safe anchorages for future voyages. Survey teams explored inland regions. Cartographers documented rivers, forests, and mountain ranges. Every expedition returned with new information. What they found astonished them. The continent was vast, far larger than anyone expected. Its lands contained immense forests, fertile plains, and resources beyond counting. Great river systems stretched across the interior. Wildlife, unlike anything known in Europe, roamed its wilderness. Entire ecosystems existed untouched by Roman influence. Yet the greatest discovery was not the land itself. It was the people. The explorers encountered civilizations with their own histories, cultures, and traditions. Some lived in villages. Others governed large settlements connected by trade routes. Roman scholars quickly realized they were not entering an empty world. They were entering another chapter of human history. The empire approached these encounters differently than many future colonial powers would in our timeline. Rome had spent centuries integrating diverse peoples into a shared civilization. Its success came not from replacing cultures entirely, but from incorporating them into larger systems. Trade often preceded conquest. Diplomacy often preceded conflict. Relationships formed gradually. Some communities welcomed Roman goods and technologies. Others remained cautious. A few resisted entirely. The continent became a complex landscape of alliances, negotiations, and cultural exchange. Trade expanded rapidly. Ships crossed the Atlantic regularly. New crops arrived in Europe. Roman tools, engineering techniques, and manufactured goods appeared in coastal settlements. Entire industries emerged around transatlantic commerce. The economic effects were extraordinary. Roman markets gained access to resources unavailable in the Old World. Merchant fortunes multiplied. Port cities expanded dramatically. Shipbuilding became one of the empire's most important industries. The Atlantic transformed from a barrier into the busiest trade route on Earth. New settlements followed. Roman colonists established towns along major harbors and rivers. Engineers constructed roads linking distant communities. Administrators organized provincial governments. Scholars documented the geography and cultures of the continent. The process resembled Rome's earlier expansion into Europe. Not a sudden conquest. A gradual integration. Within decades, Atlantic provinces became essential parts of the empire. Their wealth fueled further growth. Their resources supported expanding populations. Their strategic importance increased every year. The discovery also transformed Roman science. Astronomers observed unfamiliar skies. Natural philosophers studied new species. Geographers revised centuries of assumptions about the size and shape of the world. Knowledge expanded alongside territory. Every voyage returned with new questions. Every answer generated more curiosity. The empire entered an age of exploration unlike anything in human history. Competition soon emerged. Other powers beyond Rome's borders became aware of the discoveries. Neighboring kingdoms attempted their own expeditions. Merchants sought independent routes. The Atlantic became a stage for geopolitical rivalry. But Rome held a decisive advantage. It possessed centuries of accumulated experience in administration, infrastructure, and long-distance trade. No rival could match its resources. No rival could match its institutions. The empire dominated the ocean just as it had once dominated the Mediterranean. By the beginning of the 13th century, the world had changed fundamentally. Human civilization was no longer divided by oceans. Europe and the new continent were connected through permanent networks of trade, migration, and communication. Entire generations grew up knowing that another world existed beyond the Western Sea. For young Romans, the Atlantic no longer represented mystery. It represented opportunity. Yet even greater transformations lay ahead. The wealth flowing from across the ocean accelerated innovation. Growing populations demanded better transportation. Expanding industries required new sources of power. Engineers searched constantly for ways to increase productivity. The empire had mastered roads. It had mastered oceans. Soon, it would seek to master energy itself. And when that happened, Rome would enter an age that neither Caesar nor Augustus could have imagined. The age of sail had connected worlds. The age of steam was about to reshape them. By the year 1350 CE, the Roman Empire governed a world unlike any civilization before it. Its roads stretched across continents. Its fleets crossed oceans. Its cities housed millions. Trade flowed between Europe, Africa, Asia, and the newly settled lands across the Atlantic. For centuries, growth had seemed limitless. Yet success created a new problem. Human labor could no longer keep pace with Roman ambition. Every year, merchants demanded faster transportation. Factories required more production. Mines dug deeper into the earth. Cities consumed increasing amounts of food and resources. The empire needed a new source of power. For generations, Roman engineers had relied on water wheels, windmills, and animal labor. These technologies had served civilization well. They powered workshops, mills, and irrigation systems. But they had limits. The future required something greater. The breakthrough began in the industrial cities of northern Gaul. There, engineers experimenting with pressure and heat discovered new ways to harness steam. At first, the machines were crude. They were expensive, inefficient, and prone to failure. Most people dismissed them as curiosities. A few saw something revolutionary. The principle was simple. Water could become power. Heat transformed water into steam. Steam created pressure. Pressure created movement. Movement could drive machines. For the first time in history, energy no longer depended entirely on nature. Civilization had found a way to create power on demand. The implications were enormous. Roman investors quickly funded further research. Workshops expanded into laboratories. Engineers competed to improve designs. Every improvement increased efficiency. Every increase in efficiency attracted more investment. Innovation accelerated. Within decades, steam engines powered mines throughout the empire. Coal production increased dramatically. Deeper tunnels became possible. Resources that had once been inaccessible could now be extracted and transported. Entire industries transformed. Factories emerged near major cities. Production that once required hundreds of workers could now be performed by machines. Textiles, metal goods, tools, and construction materials became cheaper and more abundant. The economy entered a new era. Cities changed rapidly. Smoke rose above industrial districts. New neighborhoods appeared around factories. Workers migrated from rural areas seeking opportunity. Urban populations expanded faster than ever before. Rome itself became a symbol of industrial progress. Ancient monuments stood beside modern workshops. Aqueducts crossed skylines filled with smokestacks. The old and the new existed together. The empire was reinventing itself once again. Transportation experienced an even greater revolution. Engineers soon realized that steam could move more than machines. It could move vehicles. The first steam-powered wagons were slow and unreliable. Roads designed for horses struggled to accommodate them. Critics argued that such machines would never replace traditional transportation. History proved them wrong. Roman engineers refined their designs relentlessly. Stronger engines emerged. Better materials improved reliability. Dedicated rail systems began appearing between major cities. The first railways transformed commerce. Goods that once required weeks to transport could now move in days. Trade became faster, cheaper, and more predictable. Entire regions previously isolated by geography became connected. Distance itself began to lose meaning. Rail networks spread across Europe, then across Asia, then across the Atlantic provinces. The empire's vast territory became more interconnected than ever before. Merchants celebrated. Governors embraced the technology. Citizens traveled farther than their ancestors could have imagined. The steam age created a new world. Communication improved as well. Messages carried by rail moved with unprecedented speed. Information traveled faster than armies, faster than caravans, faster than ships. For the first time, a government could respond quickly to events occurring thousands of miles away. Administration became more efficient. The empire became more unified. Scientific progress accelerated alongside industrialization. Universities expanded their engineering programs. Research institutions received imperial funding. Mathematics, physics, chemistry, and metallurgy advanced rapidly. The pursuit of knowledge became a national priority. Every discovery promised practical benefits. Every invention promised greater prosperity. Yet the steam age was not without problems. Industrial cities faced pollution. Working conditions could be harsh. Wealth accumulated unevenly. Traditional industries struggled to compete with mechanized production. The empire confronted challenges it had never faced before. Some feared machines would replace human labor entirely. Others worried that rapid change threatened social stability. Debates filled universities, marketplaces, and government halls. How should Rome manage its industrial future? How much change was too much? The empire adapted as it always had. New regulations protected workers. Urban planning improved sanitation. Education programs trained citizens for emerging industries. The government sought balance between innovation and stability. The result was remarkable. Rome avoided many of the worst disruptions that accompanied industrialization in our timeline. Its strong institutions absorbed change rather than being overwhelmed by it. Industrialization became an evolution rather than a crisis. By the year 1450 CE, visitors arriving in Roman territory encountered a civilization unlike anything the ancient world could have imagined. Steam locomotives crossed continents. Factories produced goods on an unprecedented scale. Cities glowed with economic activity. Trade connected nearly every corner of the known world. The empire had entered the machine age. Yet even as Rome celebrated its achievements, new questions emerged. If steam could power trains, what else might it power? If machines could transform industry, what might they do for communication? For science? For exploration? The possibilities seemed endless. The empire had mastered roads. It had mastered oceans. Now it had mastered industry. And soon, another revolution would arrive. One even greater than steam. One that would connect the world not through railways and ships, but through information itself. The age of machines had begun. The age of networks was approaching. By the year 1550 CE, the Roman Empire had achieved what generations before thought impossible. It had survived collapse, united continents, crossed oceans, and harnessed the power of steam. Its cities were larger than ever. Its economy stretched across the globe. Its influence touched nearly every known civilization. To many, Rome appeared invincible. That illusion would soon be tested. For centuries, the empire had grown stronger. Each challenge had been overcome. Each crisis had produced reform. Each generation inherited a civilization more powerful than the one before it. But power creates its own dangers. The empire now governed hundreds of millions of people spread across vast distances. Provinces separated by oceans answered to the same government. Cultures with different traditions lived under the same laws. Industries transformed economies faster than institutions could adapt. The machine that was Rome had become so large that even small problems could have enormous consequences. The first signs appeared in the industrial cities. Factories produced unprecedented wealth, but that wealth was not distributed equally. Merchants, industrialists, and investors accumulated fortunes beyond anything seen in previous centuries. Meanwhile, many workers struggled to keep pace with the changing economy. Entire professions disappeared as machines replaced traditional labor. Tensions began to rise. In the great cities of Gaul, Italia, and Britannia, demonstrations became increasingly common. Citizens demanded reforms. Workers sought better conditions. Provincial leaders argued that local governments should have greater authority. For the first time in centuries, Rome faced widespread internal dissatisfaction. The empire was not collapsing, but it was changing. Political debates intensified. Some argued that stronger central authority was necessary to maintain unity. Others believed that greater representation would strengthen the empire in the long term. Universities became centers of discussion. Newspapers spread new ideas rapidly across the provinces. The speed of communication amplified every disagreement. A debate that once remained local could now spread across continents within weeks. The government struggled to keep pace. Meanwhile, technological progress continued accelerating. New engines powered larger factories. Rail networks expanded into previously isolated regions. Scientific discoveries transformed medicine, engineering, and agriculture. The empire grew wealthier every year. Yet prosperity alone could not solve every problem. Citizens increasingly asked difficult questions. Who should govern? How should wealth be distributed? What responsibilities did the empire owe its people? What rights did citizens possess? These questions challenged institutions that had existed for centuries. The old answers no longer satisfied everyone. The crisis deepened when several provinces demanded greater autonomy. They remained loyal to Rome, but they wanted more control over local affairs. Regional identities, long balanced within the imperial framework, became increasingly important. The empire faced a dilemma. Too much centralization risked resentment. Too much decentralization risked fragmentation. The challenge was not military. It was political. For the first time since its survival centuries earlier, Rome faced a threat that could not be defeated by armies. It had to be negotiated. Fortunately, the empire possessed one advantage: experience. Rome had survived because it adapted. Whenever circumstances changed, institutions evolved alongside them. The same flexibility that preserved the empire after the 5th century now became essential once again. A series of reforms transformed governance. Provincial assemblies gained greater authority. Citizens received broader representation. Economic regulations improved working conditions. Educational opportunities expanded. The goal was not to preserve the old empire unchanged. The goal was to preserve the empire by allowing it to change. The reforms were controversial. Traditionalists fear they went too far. Radicals argue they did not go far enough. Yet they worked. Tensions gradually eased. Economic growth continued. Political participation increased. The empire entered a new phase of development. Historians would later describe this period as the crisis of eternity. Not because Rome nearly fell, but because Rome was forced to confront a difficult truth. Nothing remains eternal by remaining the same. The very success of the empire required constant reinvention. This lesson reshaped Roman society. Citizens began viewing change not as a threat, but as a necessity. Innovation became embedded not only in science and technology, but in governance itself. The empire learned how to evolve, and that ability would prove more valuable than any army. By the beginning of the 17th century, Rome emerged stronger than before. Its institutions were more resilient, its citizens more engaged, its economy more dynamic. The crisis had revealed weaknesses. It had also revealed strengths. Most importantly, it demonstrated that Rome's greatest achievement was not conquest. It was adaptation. Yet another transformation was already approaching. Scientists experimenting with electricity began making discoveries that seemed almost magical. Messages traveled across wires faster than any train. New machines appeared every year. Inventors imagined a future where information itself could move instantly across the empire. The steam age was reaching its limits. A new age was beginning, one powered not by coal and iron, but by knowledge, communication, and energy itself. The empire had survived its greatest political challenge. Now it stood on the threshold of a technological revolution that would reshape civilization once again. And for the first time in history, Rome was preparing to build not merely a world empire, but a truly global one. By the year 1700 CE, the Roman Empire had become something unprecedented in human history. It was no longer simply an empire. It was a global system. Continents were connected by trade, communication, and shared institutions. Goods crossed oceans daily. Information moved faster than ever before. The world was becoming smaller, and Rome stood at its center. The transformation began with electricity. What started as scientific curiosity quickly evolved into practical technology. Inventors developed systems capable of transmitting messages across vast distances. Telegraph networks spread throughout the empire. For the first time, information traveled faster than transportation. A message sent from Britannia could reach Rome in hours. A governor in Alexandria could communicate with officials across continents almost instantly. The implications were revolutionary. For centuries, distance had been one of the greatest challenges facing governments. Now distance itself was losing power. The empire became more connected than ever before. Trade accelerated. Administration improved. Knowledge spread at unprecedented speed. The world entered the information age centuries ahead of schedule. Railways expanded alongside communication networks. Steam engines became more efficient. Factories grew larger. Cities reached populations previously unimaginable. Urban skylines changed dramatically as steel and engineering allowed buildings to rise higher than ever before. Rome itself became a symbol of this new age. Ancient monuments stood beside modern towers. The Colosseum remained. The Forum remained. But surrounding them were universities, research centers, factories, financial institutions, and transportation hubs serving as civilization that spanned the globe. The empire had become both ancient and modern at the same time. Education transformed society. Literacy became nearly universal throughout most provinces. Schools expanded into every major settlement. Universities attracted students from across the world. Scientific research received unprecedented support. Knowledge became Rome's most valuable resource. Every generation entered adulthood more educated than the last. Innovation accelerated accordingly. Medical breakthroughs increased life expectancy. Engineers developed new construction techniques. Scientists expanded humanity's understanding of physics, chemistry, and biology. The pace of progress seemed unstoppable. Yet the empire's greatest achievement was not technological. It was cultural. For centuries, Rome had integrated diverse peoples into a shared civilization. Now that process extended across the entire globe. Citizens from different continents participated in common institutions. Trade connected distant cultures. Ideas flowed freely between regions once separated by oceans. The empire became a meeting place for humanity itself. Languages mixed. Traditions evolved. Art reflected influences from every corner of the world. The Roman identity continued to expand, not replacing local cultures, connecting them. Some historians called it the Second Pax Romana. Others called it the Age of Unity. Regardless of the name, the result was clear. Never before had so much of humanity existed within a single political and economic framework. Yet success created new responsibilities. The empire's population now numbered in hundreds of millions. Resource management became increasingly important. Environmental concerns emerged as industry expanded. Urban growth required careful planning. Technological advancement demanded ethical oversight. Rome faced challenges no previous civilization had encountered. Once again, adaptation became essential. Government institutions evolved to meet new realities. Scientific advisory councils assisted policymakers. Regional administrations gained flexibility while remaining integrated into imperial systems. Education focused increasingly on problem-solving rather than memorization. The empire prepared for the future. Then came another revolution: the internal combustion engine, electricity, wireless communication, flight. One breakthrough followed another. Within a single century, humanity advanced more rapidly than it had during entire millennia of earlier history. Aircraft connected continents in hours rather than weeks. Radio allowed information to reach millions simultaneously. Modern industry transformed every aspect of daily life. The world changed faster than anyone could have imagined, and Rome changed with it. Ancient roads remained important, but highways now crossed continents. Merchant fleets still sailed, but aircraft dominated long-distance travel. Libraries continued preserving knowledge, but information increasingly moved through electronic networks. The empire embraced innovation without abandoning its foundations. That balance became its greatest strength. By the beginning of the 20th century, Rome stood as the most powerful civilization in history. Its economy dominated global trade. Its universities led scientific research. Its infrastructure connected continents. Its influence reached every corner of the planet. Yet even this achievement would not satisfy human curiosity. Scientists began looking beyond Earth itself. Astronomers built increasingly powerful observatories. Physicists unlocked secrets hidden within matter. Engineers developed technologies that previous generations would have considered impossible. Humanity had united the world. Now it began wondering what existed beyond it. The ancient Romans once looked across the Mediterranean and imagined distant lands. Their descendants now looked toward the stars. The next frontier would not be another continent. It would be space itself. The empire had conquered distance. It had mastered industry. It had connected the world. Now, for the first time in human history, Rome prepared to leave the earth behind. And above the atmosphere, an entirely new empire awaited. By the year 2026 CE, the Roman Empire had existed for more than 2,000 years. It had survived barbarian invasions, political crises, industrial revolutions, and technological transformations. Kingdoms rose and fell around it. New religions emerged. Entire continents were discovered. Yet Rome endured, not because it was stronger than every challenge, but because it learned how to change. The world of 2026 would be unrecognizable to Augustus, Trajan, or Constantine. Yet they would still recognize its foundations. Roman law governed billions of people. Roman institutions coordinated a civilization that stretched across continents. Roman cities remained centers of commerce, culture, and innovation. The empire had become something larger than a nation. It had become the framework of global civilization. Rome itself was no longer merely a city. It was a megacity. Ancient monuments stood surrounded by towers of glass and steel. High-speed rail lines converged beneath structures older than many countries in our timeline. Autonomous vehicles moved through streets first laid out centuries before. The Colosseum remained one of the most visited landmarks on Earth, standing as a reminder that the empire's future had never erased its past. Across the world, Roman influence was visible everywhere. A traveler could board a train in Londinium, arrive in Carthage within hours, and continue onward to Nova Roma in the Americas without ever leaving the imperial transportation network. A shared legal system connected distant provinces. Education standards remained consistent across continents. Scientific research flowed freely between universities separated by oceans. The dream of unity that once seemed impossible had become ordinary. Technology transformed daily life. Artificial intelligence assisted governments, businesses, and citizens. Quantum communication networks transmitted information instantly across vast distances. Medical advances cured diseases that once terrified humanity. Life expectancy surpassed anything imagined in earlier centuries. The empire had entered an age where knowledge advanced faster than geography. Yet perhaps the greatest achievement lay beyond Earth. For centuries, Rome had expanded across rivers, seas, and continents. Eventually, the same instinct that pushed explorers beyond the Pillars of Hercules pushed humanity beyond the atmosphere. The first Roman space stations appeared in the late 20th century. Permanent lunar settlements followed. Then came Mars. Entire cities now existed beyond Earth, supplied by regular transport fleets and connected through advanced communication systems. Roman banners flew not as symbols of conquest, but as symbols of continuity. Human civilization had become interplanetary. The empire that once struggled to defend the Rhine now maintained observatories on distant worlds. Education became one of Rome's greatest priorities. Every citizen had access to advanced learning systems. Universities operated both on Earth and beyond it. Historical records stretching back 2,000 years remained available to anyone seeking them. The preservation of knowledge had become a defining principle of civilization. Libraries no longer existed only as buildings. They existed as vast digital archives containing the accumulated memory of humanity. In many ways, Rome had become what its earliest scholars dreamed of. A civilization built not merely on power, but on understanding. Yet despite all its achievements, the empire never escaped a fundamental truth. People remained people. Political debates continued. Regional cultures remained distinct. Citizens argued about policy, economics, technology, and the future. The empire was united, but not uniform. Diversity remained one of its strengths. Local traditions survived alongside shared institutions. Ancient festivals still filled city streets. Historic languages continued to be taught. Communities preserved customs stretching back centuries. The Roman world had succeeded because it integrated differences rather than eliminating them. Looking back across 2,000 years, historians identified a single moment that changed everything. The year 468 CE, the victory that saved North Africa, the reforms that followed, the decision to preserve rather than abandon. Had those events unfolded differently, the world would have taken another path. There would have been no continuous Roman civilization, no united Europe, no early Renaissance, no global empire, no Roman cities on distant worlds. History had turned upon a handful of decisions, and those decisions shaped millennia. Yet perhaps Rome's greatest legacy was not political or technological. It was philosophical. The empire taught humanity that survival depends upon adaptation. Every civilization faces crises. Every institution ages. Every generation confronts challenges its predecessors never imagined. What matters is the willingness to evolve. Rome survived because it changed. Again and again. Across centuries. Across continents. Across worlds. The empire that conquered time did not do so through military power or wealth alone. It conquered time by refusing to become trapped by its own success. As humanity expanded into the solar system and prepared for journeys even farther, the ancient lessons remained relevant. The future belonged not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. And somewhere in Rome, beneath modern towers and ancient stones, visitors still gathered before monuments built thousands of years earlier. They looked upon the remnants of the ancient world and understood something remarkable. History had not been interrupted. The thread had never broken. From the first Roman roads to interplanetary cities, from imperial couriers to quantum networks, from wooden ships to spacecraft, a single civilization had carried humanity forward. The empire had outlived kingdoms, ideologies, technologies, and even planets. Not because it was eternal, but because it never stopped becoming something new. And as new generations looked toward distant stars, they carried with them the same dream that had guided Rome for 2 millennia. To build, to learn, to endure, to leave something worth remembering. The empire had conquered time. Now humanity would see whether it could conquer the stars.